Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Monique Bradley, tōku ingoa, he kai kōrero aho. I'm Monique Bradley and I am a storyteller and so are you. So welcome to this podcast, Uncovering Authenticity, where I chat to extraordinary people with interesting and extraordinary lives and great stories who are here to share those stories. And in just a few short minutes, it is always my hope we discover some nuggets and gems of truth and wisdom from one lived experience to yours. Today here in the studio, I'm delighted to have a lovely gentleman in the studio, Mr. Peter Altman. Welcome to the studio. Hooray. I wish we had a big audience. We need a big audience, don't we? It's quite fantastic. We do.
Somewhere.
We do. Yeah. So Peter, I'm delighted to have you here because I heard you recently speaking at Remuera Toastmasters, and I so enjoyed so many elements of your performance. I loved your vocal delivery. I loved your, as we would say in my world, pitch, pace, pause, emphasis and inflection. All the vocal tools that you used. I loved how you held the stage. And most importantly, I loved that, and this is rare now, that you weren't afraid to talk about a topic that other people might not agree with, but had meaning for you. You brought your own ideas into some contentious topics about well-being for children, looking after children and social responsibility and things like that. And I loved that. I knew it was your challenge speech you had to do for Toastmasters, but I loved that you stood unapologetically as yourself and you simply said, here's my thoughts. Before we jump into that topic, I want to find out what got you to that space of being unapologetically Peter Altman.
Well, it's interesting, Monique, that you should say that because I've never thought of myself as jumping into a space to be unapologetic about anything. I think it's important just to be yourself and be who you are and very importantly, not try to be someone else. There's a little bit of insincerity around that. So I think just whoever you are, be yourself.
And I think in this world, what I'm seeing in a lot of businesses, and I'm talking to a lot of business people who say, oh, Monique, this topic of authenticity, I think it's so important, but I know I can't be my authentic self at work because people might judge me or I'm scared I'll say the wrong thing. And so that's why I come back to seeing you speak. You just showed up, you brought this beautiful light with you when you spoke, and it was a lovely presence. What do you think has got you to that stage of just being uniquely you? It was this inner confidence I saw.
Yes. Well, again, it's a hard question for me to answer because it's requiring a bit of self-analysis. But thinking off the top of my head, something that occurs to me from time to time is that as we grow older, and I am older.
Just a touch.
And just a touch, but I'm pleased that I am older and I'm still here. That's very important, obviously, to me. But as we age, and I'm talking about whatever age you're at, whether you're a child, a teenager, in your 20s, 30s and beyond, we have thoughts that are relevant to that age. We have thoughts that are relevant to how we see the world at that time. So a teenager sees the world, obviously, through teenage eyes. When you are older and you look back, and when I say older, in your 20s, you may wonder about how you saw the world then. So the point I'm really making, as you age, your perspective changes, your views change. And I suppose, in a word, something that everyone understands is you mature, but you constantly mature. Even though now, at my age, I have views, I know I'm more mature in some senses than I were even a few years ago. My views change of things, not radical changes, but perhaps the word insight is more important.
Right.
You gain new insights into understanding all sorts of things, and amongst which is human behaviour.
Yes, fascinating. Now, you've been in this industry of understanding a little bit of human behaviour. So my understanding is you started out in market research. Now, with my marketing hat on, I've been in the last 12 years in digital marketing, and that's really all about understanding people and what their hot buttons are, what makes them engage with content. Tell me about your history in that market research space.
Well, I guess for me at that time, when I was in my early 20s and I started off in the field of market research, it happened at a time when I was working as a university student doing something totally different. But for me, it was discovery. I was learning about a career opportunity that unfolded in front of me when I'd never had the thought that I would enter this sort of career. Didn't even know what market research was till I started doing it. And it's probably something that's been in the forefront of my thinking since that time, that keep your mind open to whatever opportunity might present itself. And I think that's one of the underlying facets of my self-analysis that I think has been present throughout my life, that I've been fairly open to doing different things. Not that I've never really jumped around, but a bit of an opportunist at times. And I've learnt from that. So that opened me to a career choice that developed from there. I then grew from that job, then ended up working for a large corporate company in New Zealand, and that company changed ownership a few times. It was always a household name. And it gave me job opportunities that I never thought I would have, amongst which was travel. I travelled in Asia for a particular job I had while I was with that company for a period of time. And I had to pinch myself to think, my God, my employer is paying me to travel, and apart from the job that I had to do, which I think I did quite well, I saw other things around the world and learnt about other people and so on. And it was an amazing opportunity I had for a period of time.
So in that, I love this. I'm just taking quite a lot from this. In the work and the training that I've done around neuro-linguistic programming, as an example, I've learned that there's either sort of a concrete way of thinking or a flexible way of thinking. So it sounds like you're very much in that flexible space.
Yes.
And I know one of the things that you said before we started doing this recording today was that you were actually headhunted for work.
Yes.
What do you think was your flexible mindset and being open to opportunities, as an example? Do you think that's part of what made you attractive to headhunters?
I think so. I think the term headhunted makes it sound a lot more, what would you say? I don't know if glamorous is quite the right term.
It is pretty glamorous.
I was just in my mid-20s at that time. Wow. And the way I saw it was I was offered an opportunity to join a company for whom I'd been doing work in the company that I was with at the time. They liked what I did. They offered me a job. I took the job, and then I grew and got a lot more experience in that job, which was predominantly marketing research. I learned a lot about consumer behaviour, and at that time I was in charge of people. They called it the Consumer and Advertising Research Department, and I managed to manage that. Then I moved to a couple of other opportunities within that company. And of course, when you're younger, and I said earlier on, you think differently when you're younger,
yes.
the way you develop, your mindsets change, and probably wisdom is a term that enters your life. And you don't like to describe yourself as being wise, but it's something you do acquire, a certain amount of wisdom as you grow older. And of course, money was an incentive when you're a lot younger.
So true.
I wanted a better car and all this, so here's an opportunity to get more money. And things change over the years, and that wasn't as much of a motivation later on, although it was always there in the background.
Yes, of course.
So, I joined this company. I was with them for over 20 years and had several jobs during that time. And I only ever applied for one job, which I ended up getting that particular job.
Wow.
And there was a lot of competition for it.
Yeah.
I think it's because in the fine print it said a lot of overseas travel will be required.
So that
who
would have been
not
attractive.
apply for a job like that, regardless of whether you could do the job or not? That was rather appealing.
How cool. How
Yes,
cool.
yes.
You get your emails up for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. So and there's a lot of common threads between us in the fact that you're a fabulous speaker. I'd like to put myself in the same basket as you. I think we're both fabulous. But what I like about that too is the consumer research stuff that you do. That's no different from the work I did as an actor.
Oh, yes.
Consumer research for me is about understanding characters and understanding their drivers, their hot buttons, what their values are. If I was in their skin, and that sounds a little creepy, but you know what I mean. If I was in their skin portraying them as a character, I need to know all that information. That's so similar between both of our worlds.
Yes.
How has that information or that practice that you learnt taken you into other areas of your life? Because my understanding is you moved from there also into property as well.
Yes.
How has that as a transferable skill helped you throughout these other areas of your life?
Well, I think I've always been a good listener. I think I've always been fascinated by other people's stories too. And when I had flats, and for a lot of people, it's a terrible job to have. I mean, I owned them, and so I selected the tenants, whereas other people would think it's the last thing they would want to do because they didn't like what they saw as potential personality conflict and all these sorts of things. But I would have had, over the period of time that I had flats, sort of well over 250, 300 tenants, I suppose. So there are, not at one time, but over the years.
Over the years, yes.
So they're people you get to know. And you asked me about how market research translates to that or something like that.
Yes, it's right.
Well, it's part of listening to people and understanding the needs and wants of others. And in market research, one of the obvious things that most people would recognise if you're a manufacturer or supplier of goods and services, you have to produce or supply what people want. To know what people want, you have to find out what their likes and dislikes might be. So your product or service can be tailored to their needs, which means listening and understanding and being flexible enough to produce what they might want. As an owner of flats and having tenants, it's really much the same. People would come along, you'd instantly either like them or dislike them, as long as you're not too sure. So you'd have to understand something about people, and I was one of those people, which would be my advice to anyone in this sort of industry, is not to go for the highest rents because you want to keep tenants. Turnover is not good, it reduces the profitability and so on, but you want people who are stable, look after the place, and it's better to achieve that by not charging too much. So people stay longer.
So you look after the people.
You look after people. And if people want to paint a place or do something to it, let them do it. Not anything, but give them the materials, encourage them and thank them because it's good for them and it's good for me too.
They become your labour, right?
That's right, yes. But they are my customers and I am a supplier of a service and a home to them. So that's why understanding people is important.
And that's quite different from... I've worked over the years with lots of different property managers and everybody has a different approach and a different perception of tenants.
Yes.
So I have to tell you it's quite refreshing to hear because not everybody plays the game that way.
Yes.
So I think I'm very much in my work very obviously people focused. I'm always thinking as a speaker, what are the stories that I'm going to share that might be helpful or that people can take information away from or that makes them think differently, which obviously what brought you into the studio today, you do that. You challenged the audience when I heard you speak. Before we get to there, because there's a bit missing, between the property and where I met you a couple of weeks ago, has there been any other work that you've done or has once you hit the property game, was that it for you?
In parallel to a lot of that, and this is not a job or a career, but I have 2 children and I've got 4 grandchildren. And I'm sure my daughter won't mind this too much now because she's in her mid-40s, but as a teenager, she was quite a wild teenager.
Right, gotcha.
And we got involved without knowing because teenage behaviour, this happens to a lot of people, and as teenage behaviour gets a little bit wild and unruly and out of your control as a parent, you feel a loss of control because we all want the best for our children. And when it looks like that dream might fade, in fact, there's a term I like that parents have. They have a dream for the perfect child, and sometimes that dream can fade. And so they feel as though they're losing what life should be delivering for them as a parent, and they see it in their kids. And our daughter was, as I've already said, without going to all the specifics, but became quite a wild child in her teen years and left home at quite an early age and was without our control. And of course, with the wisdom that all parents feel they have, they want a better life for their child, and the opportunity to give that to your child fades. But everybody has different personalities, and our daughter was very independent and very forthright. And again, without going into all the things that happened, she went through a period of having a couple of children. She wasn't married to different fathers. And we developed, my wife and I, in the background, sort of thoughts about how, in spite of her behaviours, in an odd way, she's in control of her destiny. It is her destiny. She's in charge of it. Might not be what we wanted, but with our intervention, which was certainly not overbearing, we learned a lot about behaviour, and it introduced us to a world of parents who are having huge difficulties with their children.
Oh, wow.
And this was in the early 90s, desperately seeking some sort of support for ourselves. My wife and I joined an organisation called Tough Love.
Oh, I know Tough Love.
Yes, it's still around, but it's barely a shadow of what it was way back then, because all sorts of helping agencies have developed since then. And I ended becoming the national chairman for Tough Love organisation.
No way.
And yes, and it was a big organisation. We had about 35, 50 groups around the country. Now there are probably only 6 or 7, and they're sort of barely holding together. But the organisation itself is very, very good. Its philosophy is excellent, and it's not, as a lot of people think, doing tough things to your kids. It's getting parents to do tough things, knowing what to let go of, how to put standards in place for your kids, consequences and so on. No violence, nothing like that.
No.
But how to be positive with your children, to encourage good behaviour with positive thoughts and behaviours, etc. So anyway, I was involved with that, or got intensely involved with them, travelled to the United States and Canada twice and spoke at different conferences, and because it was a big organisation with a big base. But it has faded away in the United States as well. But that I'm still with them because I'm a life member, but I'm not actively involved. But I learned a lot about the importance of parental involvement with families, and a massive amount of empathy, compassion, empathy and compassion, that's enough, sums it up, for other parents who are going through difficulties and their need for help and support. So I learned a lot more, another layer to my growing wisdom again. I use that word carefully because it sounds a little bit self-congratulatory.
No, you congratulate yourself. I think it's fantastic.
You gain some wisdom, and that helps others, and that's what the organisation is. Sometimes the best help comes from the least likely sources. So that's why it's important to keep your mind open to opportunities for help when you need help. And I could see what I did and what others did, my wife was involved as well, was very helpful for parent support, which is why now, later in life, I still believe even more strongly that taking self-responsibility, and I'm talking about parenting, most parents can do much, much, much more than they think they can if they get given the tools and know how.
100%. That's amazing.
And be less demanding on others solving your problem. You have it within you to solve your own problems. It's just that sometimes you don't know how. And it's just a little tweak to what you're doing sometimes makes a big difference. So that's parallel to my working career, because I was intensely involved for many, many years. And I enjoyed it, if you can say you enjoyed it, but I learned a lot from others, and which is why it gives me the strong belief that what we need, and I don't know where to start with this thought or how grand it could be.
Yeah.
You heard it first here.
Okay.
What we need is a ministry of good parenting. We do not need
I love the way
ministry.
you framed that.
Yes, we do not need such as Oranga Tamariki, which does a lot of good work, of course.
Yeah.
But it's overly focused on children and even taking children out of the environment of parents. And very often that's absolutely necessary. But you can't do that without causing lingering harm forever within families. When children get taken away from their parents, nobody else. That's a bit too absolute, but not many people have the skills to be a better parent than the real parents. But there are a lot of bad parents who should never have had children in the first place. And not everything can be fixed. But there are a lot of parents who cannot be good parents simply because they don't know how. So that's why I would like to see a ministry of good parenting.
Oh, I love that.
I like the name because it is a positive connotation.
Absolutely.
And that's what's needed.
I'm all about language.
Yes.
So when you're talking about good parenting, that just aligns with everything I believe in as well. I love this. And obviously this comes back to your presentation at Toastmasters. I heard you speak into this topic, which is why I said, I need you to be on this podcast, because we are seeing, and like you said, we are seeing those situations where children do need to be uplifted for their safety.
Yes.
I am also a firm believer that education is really important, and I love that pathway that you are going down, or wherever you are heading with that. I think there's massive scope for that. I have gained so much wisdom from this chat today, and I have to say that at the end of every one of these chats, but you've already given me so much. I normally say to my guest, if you were on Oprah, let's pretend you're on Oprah right now. I'm the new Oprah. You heard it here too.
Yes.
Heard it here first.
You're better looking.
Oh, thank you,
Yes.
thank you. Keep talking. What would be the wisdom, if summing up all of that experience that you've had because it sounds like collectively you've got this wisdom toolkit of lots of things that feed into this kind of one philosophy or way of being, or which is what I call the showing up unapologetically yourself way of being. What would be that piece of wisdom you would share with a parent, a business owner, an entrepreneur, somebody who might be struggling right now to make a change? They're not feeling great. They're disengaged from their life. What would be, this is your Oprah moment, what would you want them to know?
Yes, you're sort of unloading a huge question, but I think I could probably distill it down to something, and that is whenever you have a problem, and it doesn't matter whether it's a work-related problem, but more importantly, a personal problem, and you start to look for someone to help you solve that problem, ask yourself, what can I do for myself? How can I take greater responsibility for solving this problem by doing something myself? Because I think when we get to this fork in a road where there's a big problem, we go down the road, the fork, where we're looking for someone else to do it for me or someone else to blame. I think generally there's too much blaming in society. It's always someone else's fault. But whenever a problem arises, we have a role to play in it. And I think it's important to look at ourselves for what can I do? That's one thing. And the other thing, because there's another thing too, it's important to let go of things that really hurt you, concern you a lot. I don't mean ignore, but don't let it consume you. It's important to look to positive things things that you can do that make life a little bit easier, make you more content. Be selfish. And I don't mean just go and sit amongst the roses and gaze at the blue sky and the clouds floating by. That can be helpful, but you've got to take action. And unless you take action, nothing is really going to happen. So action that leads to increasing your sense of self-worth, self-responsibility, and lessening the natural desire that some people have to blame others for their problem.
Oh. Wow, so good. That is so good. That is literally a mic drop moment, if you know the term.
Oh, yes.
So good. I'm so there with you. That is incredible. Well, Peter, I've absolutely delighted I am delighted spending this time with you and listening to your toolkit of wisdom coming through. And thank you for being so present with me and sharing time and space and all of this goodness. It was a delight and a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monique.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure for me to be here too.